Okay, welcome everyone to the final of LC 2017. Congratulations to all teams for making it thus far. Opening government, we have girl. Opening opposition, IUMC. Closing government, IUMA. Closing opposition, indicated. I'm Yard. I'm currently from with me are Shamila, Hunting, Arthur, and Jay. On the motion that this House regrets the firing of employees who have been found guilty by the Court of Public Opinion, the Prime Minister of Kenya.
Sorry.
Okay.
Just leave it. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
As much as Team Girl in this debate would like you to believe that firing these important individuals would change the way patriarchy functions, would change the way bias and dubious individuals function, we think it only strengthens the insidious ways in which patriarchy hurts individuals and also creates future victims because of the inability for us to create structural changes when we address the problems at its root. What would I talk about in my speech? Number one, why we think this is principally unjust and due process is extremely important for us to defend regardless of circumstance and how much support that individual has in the court of public law. Secondly, why do we think it's extremely important for us to follow that due process in order to ensure for us to, number one, make structural changes within that company and society at large, but secondly, addressing points of views that are very pertinent in society and don't just go away with the firing of a few individuals. So number one, why do we think due process is extremely important? And generally before that, what are we okay with? We are okay with employers saying we are against sexual assault. We are okay with employers saying we are for diversity within our company. And we are okay with employers being instigated to start investigation and saying this was a very regrettable action and we want to investigate what happened. What we are not okay with these individuals, very obviously as pointed out by the motion, lose their jobs because of by these companies without due process just because society pushes that company to do so. We are okay and we are very much for ensuring these companies improve their human HR policies in dealing with sexual assault, ensuring that victims come out and the environment within the company is being more helpful towards them, and essentially improve justice for victims and ensuring more diversity exists within the company. We think we address that when we address the root cause as opposed to firing these individuals. So the first argument is, why do we think due process is important? Number one, we think no matter who the allegations are against and what these allegations are about, everyone deserves the principle of self-defense to be able to go to a protected environment of a court to be able to hurt, as opposed to trying to defend yourself on BBC and CNN where people already have their opinions about you. Because we think, panel, laws are made by erring on the side of caution. Even if you think it's easier under your side to get people who are, like everyone knows, they're sexual assaulters, and it may be very easy to catch them by pursuing this, but we think you also have to defend a world where innocent individuals are trapped by this and are proven to be guilty by the court of public law. Therefore, we think laws should be based on erring on the side of caution in order to defend no innocent person is assumed to be guilty without due process. Sit down. Secondly, it's extremely important to maintain the legitimacy of the final decisions that it made. You cannot ensure these victims will not be victim blamed, will not be told that they just want this for attention and therefore hurt in the process of trying to find closure after that person is fired. We think this further prevents future victims from coming out and speaking out because of the mudslinging occurs in the media, because of the fact that victims are portrayed in such a bad light, because of the avenues through which they chose to obtain justice. We think extremely crucial to maintain the integrity of that final decision. Lastly, it's extremely crucial for companies to follow due processes because that's the only way you can transfer these important procedures to court. Courts which have procedural laws to be able to properly investigate. Courts that can subpoena individuals to come out and give witness testimonies, to be able to get warrants to further investigate, to be able to identify hearsay and properly come up with a decision. If opposition would like you to believe that in all scenarios, this person is so powerful that the victim will not be able to ever get justice in court, we don't think, number one, we think oftentimes these are exaggerations and the court oftentimes allows proper criminal investigation to take place. But secondly, if that's the case, that same individual has the same amount of power to be able to come back and sue your company for unfairly firing them, therefore hurting the victim equally. Why is it mutually exclusive under our side for these proper procedures to take place? Because number one, oftentimes companies do not want to spend the same, they often absolve themselves of liability to transfer to court when they've already satiated the court of public opinion, right? I am not going to spend so much of money, effort, and my liability as a company transferring this to court when I've already washed my hands off it and fired this individual. Therefore, I am no longer associated with this individual and no longer have to spend so much of my company's resources making those HR changes, ensuring this person goes to court, ensuring victims come out, when I can obviously in social media look like a good guy and therefore fire that individual. Second issue, because this isn't just about individuals who allege to be sexual assaulters, but also individuals who are racist and believe in some weird neo-Nazi principles. Right? Why do we think it's really important for us to address those points of view in the real world? Because those people who believe that, who send out those memos, etc., one of the important person may be fired, but that doesn't mean that a lot of individuals don't feel that way or think that way. What you do under your side is, number one, you make these individuals retreat into their own secluded thoughts and processes where they feel like they are the victim, where they feel like society doesn't listen to them, and therefore they defend their thought process even more. They insidiously ensure that policies that help victims, policies that want to have more diversity within their program, fail because they'll never vote in favor of it because their points of view were never addressed. We need to weed them out by having conversations with them in the office cafeteria, in the boardroom, where they don't fear for being fired. Sure, Mubarak.
So you can choose to err on the side of caution when it comes to court of law. Could you illustrate why a company must fulfill that level of metrics for their employees?
We think it's fine because a company can the metric, for example, even those companies that did fire never had a metric that all of our companies must never have any neo-Nazi thoughts to begin with, because you cannot dictate what an individual chooses to believe in or not, as long as that individual doesn't act on it and therefore hurt your other employees. Lastly, why do we think sustainable changes will not be made? Because the individual, we're not arguing having fence sitters and censors for the sake of arguing it, right? These are individuals you need to be able to vote for policies such as ensuring more women in the first place, such as ensuring increasing the time in which investigations can happen, ensuring changing the toxic cultures in which corporations work. These are the individuals you need to believe, who also find it very difficult to help you when at the same time you're not fulfilling conditions of due process. You're essentially firing people for thinking the way they think. These are the individuals who you need to make sustainable policy changes within your company, who you lose out. These are the sustainable changes you need in order to ensure that in the long run, more victims are not created, and also those victims are served in the best manner possible. We are very proud to stand on the side of girls.
Thank you. I invite the leader of the opposition.
1 second.
Testing. Testing. We agree. Due process is important, but unfortunately, when you're rich and can sway and subjugate the courts to your own whims, when even legal frameworks don't classify a man calling you inferior as a technical crime, the only form of justice you can get is where the rest of the world listens to you. If Sarah wants to err on the side of caution, opening opposition proposes erring on the side of the potentially innocent victims who don't have any other form of justice other than the one of public opinion. I'm very proud to stand on side opposition. Three things in my speech. Firstly, will courts adjudicate properly and administer justice? Secondly, how immorality can pervade without legal consequences? And thirdly, even if some innocents suffer, why is the trade-off worth it? But before I move on to my main issues, is that problem, Eric? Yeah. So, very important piece of clarification here, because I don't think Sarah necessarily did the work, right? Who are we talking about with regards to the potential people who will be criminalized here? Firstly, we think that people who will be judged by the court of public opinion would very much likely be the very powerful, privileged people such as Kevin Spacey, such as James Damore, who is very much garnered their moral outrage by virtue of escaping justice. That is to say that the public are far less likely to feel as if to be outraged by these people unless they've been administered the justice to begin with. So the vast majority of the people that we're talking about here are the privileged people who can very much sway the intention of the court to side with them. But secondly, let's talk about the actually innocent people. We've contend that these are the minority of cases which we are willing to trade off later in my speech. Firstly, will courts adjudicate properly and administer justice in a manner that is equitable? Let's just talk about three reasons why the sort of crimes that we're talking about here are very much difficult to adjudicate and adjudicate on, right? Firstly, recognize that these are sects of crimes with very little to no proof to adjudicate on. That is to say, if you overtly sexually harass someone, you are very much shushed and hushed to provide evidence to the court. And when you discriminate a minority, when you tell an African American that you're inferior because of your race, these are not burdens of proof that the court can possibly adjudicate on, because it does not reach the legal standard to make someone culpable of a particular crime. So we don't think that these sorts of crimes we are talking about necessarily provide enough proof. Secondly, recognize that the public opinion necessarily means that, so sure, the public opinion could lead to very believable stories, right? But it is very much a different ballgame when it comes to the courts. That is to say that with courts, they apply the metric of beyond a reasonable doubt as opposed to, for example, one which is more equitable, such as balance of probabilities. That is to say that to ensure culpability, you have to provide mounts of evidence to prove that, for example, an employee was discriminatory. And recognize that when it comes to the privileged, powerful few, these people are very much able to have their friends protect them, to provide witness testimonies, to provide background that these people are indeed innocent and are not likely to be the perpetrators of this particular crime. So the sort of burden that you necessarily impose is already one that's necessarily very, very high in courts. But thirdly, recognize that what the nuance Sarah missed was that people often come out post facto. That is to say that people often come out after the statute of limitations has already passed. This necessarily means that in between that time, they were kept silent because they worry about their jobs, they worry about their careers. They're not going to speak out to this individual's misconduct. And by the time that they do, unfortunately, the statute of limitations is over. Presumably, before that particular time, they were silenced by the fact that there are other considerations to worry about. So the courts are not able to administer justice in this particular circumstance. I hope Meg gives a bunch of reasons why. Secondly, let's talk about how immorality can pervade without legal consequences. No, thank you, man. So, what do I mean by this, right? So, presumably, when James Damore is fired based on saying that women are biologically inferior, or when Milo Yiannopoulos contends that African Americans are inferior because of their genes, or even when Reuben Murdoch denies promotion to women surely because of their gender, these are not things that provide any legal consequence for them because it is not within the confines of the penal code or the confines of law. So in those particular circumstances, while it is morally objectionable, it does not necessarily accrue a legal consequence for these particular individuals. Because recognize that the comparative is they have to rely on courts, which try to incorporate these crimes into the legal framework. So when the powerful are able to subvert this, for example, by employing lawyers who are able to sway judges to their own rhetoric and stuff like that, they're able to essentially escape the forms of justice that we get outside the house when we get a court of public opinion to call outrage. This is massively important in terms of deterring these individuals from necessarily doing this crime. Because recognize that in the future, in their world, you have Kevin Spaceys who are sure that they will not get prosecuted on the other side of the house because they have rich friends backing up with them, because like sexual discrimination is not a crime because it's not within the legal confines. And outside the house, they're going shaking in their boots because they worry that their job is at the cost of public opinion. I think that's far better on the outside the house insofar as it leads to far better situations for women. I'll get to it in my third point, but before that, closing.
Why does it matter if some people are rich or privileged? Why does that mean that it is okay to just apply this to everyone?
Sure. We're not saying it's okay. We're just saying that since the rich and privileged are far more likely to be able to sway the law to their own whims, we think we should err on the side of caution and garner the sense of public outrage toward their misgivings. Thirdly, let's talk about even if the innocent suffer, why is it worth it? I think the first thing to say here is that presumably there's still a bunch of reasons why we can believe that the stories being corroborated are true. Firstly, multiple women come out after the statute of limitations to corroborate each other's stories and tell like the world that these stories are indeed true. Recognize that these are things that still cannot be tested within the confines of law because they don't necessarily garner the same evidential capacities. But thirdly, recognize that it's also very much within the incentives of potential people coming out that you have to worry about the potential media scrutiny and worry whether people do indeed believe you. These are considerations that are far more likely to act as a disincentive in the instance in which you are actually lying. So we think that in those instances, it's actually far more likely to be that people are telling the truth. But even if that's not true, why is it worth it? First reason, we have to err on the side of caution in this circumstance. We recognize that we create atmospheres for women and African Americans to never feel like they're discriminated against. Sarah said, fine, like they're fine condemning these people, but they're not fine hiring them. Like, I'm sorry, but like Matt Lauer is still there, and I, as a sexually assaulted woman, have to deal with the fact, contend the fact that every day I see this man who sexually harassed me. I think that is far more likely to lead to worse atmosphere, regardless of whether the company condemns them. I think the fact that the company does condemn them but still hires them is presumably that leads me to believe that I don't trust the company and starting on like Matt Lauer in this circumstance. It leads to far worse situations. But secondly, I think it's also far more important to prioritize potential victims, because in a world without public courts of opinion, they are forced to go through these courts. They are beholden to skills of lawyers. They are beholden to judges who are incapable of assuming that their rich friends are guilty. That's a far worse world to live under. But secondly, recognize that the court system is also very taxing and traumatic for many individuals. That you have to spend months and months of going through the appellate process to necessarily tell whether you're innocent or not. I think these are things that lead to far worse situations comparatively to how we can ensure that the world has your back. Opening opposition has to come up with a response as to how we get the rich and privileged accountable. Very proud to oppose.
Thanks for that speech. I invite the Deputy Prime Minister to follow you.
Hello. The biggest value that I learned from law school was that justice must not just be done, but must be seen to be done. And that's because justice deals with human lives who are very much intertwined with their emotions, with the cost of losing their entire livelihoods. That's why we need to deal it with the most delicate and transparent way possible. That's why the due process exists, and that's why even in the event that you can guarantee that this person is guilty, you still need to make sure that they go through that process. In my speech, I'm going to answer two questions. Number one, why do you think that this innocent until proven guilty should be a metric that is upheld by the company similarly as courts? And secondly, why do you think that this is necessary? We're talking about like sustainable change and why we help the victim. Firstly, what is the metric that companies should follow, and why do you think that this is the metric as a response to opening opposition? Because opening opposition says that the reason why we should do this is because like it's almost guaranteed that the person is already guilty. But
notice that when you're talking about a corporation, and this is your employee, the fact that the corporation and the employer holds a position of power and autonomy over these employees, the fact that their employees' entire livelihoods depend on them, the fact that being fired goes onto your track record and it harms you in terms of getting future jobs. A lot of the consequences of societal stigma, reputation, ability to start over and be able to integrate are all of the same consequences a person has to face even when they are found guilty by the courts. Which means that if the consequences translate same in value, it means that the process of which that the employers should uphold are the same as courts, which is to ensure that they constantly stand on the side of caution. But secondly, I think that companies oftentimes end up firing these employees that are suspected of wrongdoing to absolve liability. No, thank you. You want to portray these companies as, oh, they're always good, they always have their best interests. That's not true. Sometimes it's conflicting as well, right? Companies do this as a precautionary measure to protect themselves in a sense of absolving liability to sort of suppress further investigations towards the situation. So for example, a victim comes out and says that there was a sexual assault that was committed ontowards me by one of your employees. A lot of the times these employers end up just doing sort of tokenistic investigations and then end up firing that person because they are afraid the point at which that the victim continues this, the victim may end up suing the employer and the corporation for vicarious liability as well. They don't want to be held liable in that, therefore they end up washing their hands and they say, forget about this, move on. And the reason why that pressure is very much real is because oftentimes victims are surrounded by individuals who, like, not necessarily bigots, not necessarily sexist, but they say, look, what else do you want? The person already lost their job. Isn't it also just better for you to move on so that the rest of us can be able to have a good teamwork and whatever and finish this project because we have a timeline? People start prioritizing a lot of things else above and beyond the sexual allegation that surrounds this thing. No, thank you. Thirdly, they say that the point at which you go to courts, you have less likelihood of winning or that there's less of a will for victims to want to come out and sort of report. But hold on. Given the fact that society is nuanced, there are some people who obviously are like completely sexist. There are some people who are like on the fence sitters, which we would argue later on you end up losing. But I think even for the people who like end up supporting you, if companies also had some like courage in your world in order to fire them, must mean that there is still some form of support for these individuals to be able to report, that it's not as if all of the odds are against them. In fact, we think that the point at which these corporations go ahead, and it's actually a lot different in comparison to civil suits. Criminal suits and like sexual allegations, like the fact that you can like subpoena a witness, the fact that they can't lie, the fact that you can't have interactions with the witnesses, otherwise you'll be fired, you'll be charged with obstruction of justice, the fact that there is a huge burden of which you need to adhere to, as opposed to civil suits where you can intimidate the person to sort of just agree to like an out-of-court settlement. Given that, we think that there is a high likelihood that this person won't just be doomed to like not get justice the point at which they go to court. Second question, why we think that this is necessary? Firstly, we think that this affects the narrative for change, because I think that although I may disagree with James Damore's detail of why women are inferior, no thank you, many people do. The point at which you fire him, I think that people end up vilifying the victim, vilifying the feminist movement and the women's cause, the fact that women and the entire issue around sexual allegation meant that you were above the law, that you didn't have to go to court, you didn't have to go through the due process. They end up sympathizing the perpetrator. The perpetrator starts playing the victim card. You end up tainting and derailing a lot of the discourse and the vilification and the frustration that people have over the fact that this person didn't have due process, and the fact that they end up getting emotionally charged is the exact reason why victim blaming happens. And they start asking questions to sort of confirm their biases that this person perhaps wasn't all that wrong to begin with, because there is some element of sympathy that exists. But moreover, we think that this issue doesn't just happen in a vacuum. That's when people end up tainting any forms of further discourse revolving around sexual allegation and any of the other pertinent issues that the feminist movement want to talk about. That people start trivializing it and saying, why should we listen to this, given the fact that currently, in real life, there are policies and actions of other people whereby they end up punishing a person that has been accused by a woman even without needing the law in the picture. So why do we actually need to correct the law, given the fact that we have other ways to fix this that is like extrajudicial? Closing.
Do you think that a divisive society would have been able to reach the found to be guilty verdict in the court of public opinion, or that the verdict of guilty can only happen when there's a general consensus and agreement within society that they are wrong?
No, I think that the guilty verdict can be found in court, as what I just explained. But I think also the reason reason why this is important, I think, secondly, why this is necessary is that when you're talking about due process, when you're talking about a person being guilty, when you're talking about crime, it really isn't black and white. It isn't just guilty, innocent, punish 100%, don't punish at all. The reason why, even if I were to give you the benefit of the doubt that this person is absolutely guilty, is that there are things like self-defense that amount to mitigating factors. That's why different judges can evaluate things on a case-by-case basis, even if all of those individuals are equally guilty. This means that you take into account whether or not they deserve probation, whether they deserve minimum or maximum punishment. But in your world, you don't have the incentive to further investigate. All of them end up getting the same punishment without evaluating that. I know, if you're following your emotions, you're thinking, yeah, off with their heads, everybody should be punished. But when you're talking about due process, when you're talking about justice, you need to evaluate it in a sense that all of the circumstances that are involved that are linked towards committing a crime, because those things are acknowledged in law as mitigating factors. Because if you disagree with those circumstances, my question then is, are you okay with the judicial system at all? In your world, you need to defend that, why is that due process shouldn't exist, but moreover, why is it that law is always black and white and mitigating factors and defenses don't have validity? Thank you.
Thanks for that speech. I need that you need your views.
If you vote for any team inside government, you must remember the following two things. First, you vote for a world where after decades of victims being too scared to come out, some of them finally are brave enough to do so. And when they do, some people get angry. Companies pay lip service. They say, we are investigating. We condemn this sort of action. And Kevin Spacey continues to make Netflix movies and shows and make millions of dollars. And you see people like Matt Lauer, who called you an inferior being because of your gender, continue to work as your boss the next day you go to work. That's a world side government wants to live in. Second thing side government wants to live in is a world where due process is incredibly unlikely. And I'll talk about this now. Why is due process incredibly unlikely? Because a few things. First, I think Khalis already pointed to you that in a significant proportion of these issues, due process within courts of law are incredibly hard to get for a reason that these people are incredibly privileged. By the way, that's a characterization that's constant in this debate. This debate is not about your narrative discourse about your average employee and how that interaction works in the workplace, because these are people who are famous or influential enough to get into the court of public opinion to begin with. So by default, we're talking about people who are celebrities or important employees at Google, people with significant amounts of power to do things with that ideology, not just hold those ideologies in a vacuum and have the right to hold them. So in that instance, why is due process unlikely? I think Khalis told you already that often the fact that their positions of privilege meant that a lot of victims didn't come out on time and statute of limitations are out, or it's very difficult to get evidences out from something that happened 30 years ago when Kevin Spacey tackled a 14-year-old, right? I think in this particular situation, it's incredibly unlikely that anyone will get a sort of legal procedure, right? But also, in a lot of these instances, it's a he said, she said thing. Even if you have 14 people coming out, to us, it's incredibly likely, if not impossible, that this person didn't commit an act when 14 different women come out from 14 different situations, from 14 different contexts, and said this person did it. But in the court of law, that's never enough, because you need actual evidence to suggest, actual physical evidence to suggest that happened. I think that's why balance of probability means that there's a mechanism of justice in this world as opposed to theirs. I think that's quite important. But second, I think, but also, even let's assume due process actually happens. We think due process is way more likely under our side as opposed to theirs. Imagine a world where you come out and when victims come out after thinking about it, after being really scared, and after years, some of them decide to come out. In that situation, when the company says, hey, we are not going to do anything about it, we're not going to fire this employee, I think it is incredibly disempowering for these victims to continue on that narrative and have the courage to even go to courts to continue on when they don't believe the society is backing them up in those particular situations. When they don't believe people in power who can make a difference are actually backing them up in that particular situation. I think that's quite important as well. No, thank you. I think the second thing is this, right? They say, oh, due process can happen, and like companies are also quite biased in how they operate. If that is true, due process only happens because of the public outrage we create. And I think as a result of us being able to create the public outrage and doing this, only due process happens. They say, oh, but like they just fired the employee in essence, right? No, in fact, it's easier for those employers to not fire these employees because these are people that are important to them. Like to Netflix, Kevin Spacey is really, really important, right? To Google, James Damore is quite important because these are people with critical technical skills versus people who may not even be a company who either does it or low-level employee who accuses someone else doing that, right? I think in that particular situation, without any public outrage and the ability to fire, and when they don't fire them, I think due process doesn't really happen under their side of the house. I think that's quite important. Closing.
So would you be okay with, say, for example, would you be okay with public court in Tennessee saying that we don't want you working in our company if you're going to take abortion pills, so we're going to fire you? Or the public court in Bangladesh saying we're not going to give you a job if you're Jamaat because you committed war crimes in 71.
Okay, amazing. So I think this is what happens, right? I think this debate is specific to specific immoral characters. But however, we're going to say this. I think in the situation we're talking about public outrage over these kinds of acts. We are not looking at subsets of populations looking to certain things, but rather we're looking at humongous amounts of population and significant portions of the population coming up and saying, like, I don't know what this Islamist extension is going to be. I don't think that's relevant to this debate. Second, I think this is the portion of this debate that like OG doesn't really deal with. That there are people who can't have due process because what they technically did wasn't illegal to begin with, right? So these are people who are doing dubious immoral behavior within these kinds of within these kinds of neighborhood, within these kinds of office workplaces. So people who say women are inferior and are not being able to do, but like that's not, that statement in itself is nothing illegal. In that situation, we would rather have an inclusive workspace because this is the person who can actually create damage within that environment. So they say, but guys, you should have legal like bar for them because like firing them also means similar levels of harms as jailing them apparently or convicting them. I don't think that's true, particularly in this context where people are quite privileged, quite rich. I think in this particular instances, the loss of the job does not necessarily mean suddenly they're homeless and like obviously their freedoms are not being taken away. So I think the level of harm done to them is a lot less than an actual conviction. So I think that's all on a parity quite fair. But the second thing is this, right? Because they might say like, oh, the narrative debate can go this way or that way. But what we objectively know to be true is that these people have significant power and they use their ideologies, can use their ideologies to have their power. Note that in their role, James Damore sits in a Google office deciding who gets promoted. And like they don't have to actively say that's a woman, that's why they won't get promoted because that's an anti-discrimination policy. But then they don't have to say it publicly, right? But you know that that ideology exists, means that it's highly likely that this person is going to use that ideology to discriminate in the workplace. So on a balance of probabilities, who should we prioritize? I think we should prioritize the more vulnerable actors in these kinds of situations because those are the people who are the most defenseless, right? Look, it is highly unlikely that innocent people will suffer as a consequence because it's incredibly difficult for a lot of people to come out to create public outrage because it takes immense amounts of bravery to come out and accuse someone else when you know there will be lots of public backlash as a result of your actions. So I don't think people take this decision willy-nilly. Given that circumstance, I think if any, the amount of innocent people who will suffer are very less, if any, under our side. And I think those people should be able to take the hit. We will trade that off because the kind of culture we have created is just not safe for women. For the first time in a long time, people who have committed really immoral acts, including people who have committed sexual abuse, are now going around actually looking behind their backs. For the first time feeling threatened. For the first time thinking that their actions may have consequences. I think that's a world that's much better than continuous privilege of those people so they can shut victims up. I'm supremely proud to oppose.
What's missing in this debate is what this court of public opinion looks like, how it forms opinions. And I'm going to be the first thing to tell you why it's extremely likely to be wrong, and given that how that is extremely harmful to women. My main extension will be why we should never, ever give a public court of opinion legitimacy, particularly in situations where it is not as liberal as we think, i.e. 90% of the world. But before that, a few responses to the contradictory case from opening opposition. So first of all, their assumption is that, oh, rich people can sway the laws to their own ends. A few responses to that. And because of that, due process is unlikely we have to do it this way. Number one, these individuals can't even keep their job. They are not so powerful as to be able to be immune to all sorts of pressure, which means that they will also be able to bow down in a court. Number two, it's a comparative, right? We'll tell you that due process is far better, even if it's unlikely, than a court of public opinion, which is extremely random. Thirdly, sit down, you made zero attempts to trade off individuals who are actually innocent and have their lives destroyed by the fact that they're accused by individuals, and even when it wasn't true, that those individuals really raped someone. But thirdly, I think it's contradictory for this reason, right? So you say that individuals are able to sway a court of an actual court because they're extremely rich, but they're unable to sway a court of public opinion, right? That's contradictory, because what we tell you is that every time a court of law absolves a person, the blame is put on all women, right? That the court of public opinion was wrong and that all women in this case are now branded as liars. That means that under your side, it's actually more difficult for victims to come out, because at the point where you're telling me that courts are more likely to side with the men and not the women, that actually means that women are more likely going to be branded as liars. So, but we don't think that's true, right? Rich people aren't able to get away that much in court. It's not like wealth gives you immeasurable amounts of immunity. But fourthly, what Mubarak also told you was that, guys, it's not technically illegal. Guys, saying women are inferior in a company is 100% illegal, and that is okay to be fired for it, right? There is no such thing as something that is not technically illegal that we cannot cover under status quo. But more than that, right? I think that my entire problem with the opening opposition is that we can fix all of their problems by simply making the law better, making it so that rich people don't have ability to side-skirt the law, making sure that we have more protections. I don't understand why we need to put on this random court of public opinion to suddenly trial individuals when we have perfectly good legal methods of doing so, right? Why should we never give the court of public opinion legitimacy? A few things, right? So I think a few things happen here. The first thing you have to understand is that every time a company does this, it cements in the public's mind that a court of public opinion is correct. That it's okay to create a public opinion based on hearsay. And understand that this is based on rumors, sit down. This is oftentimes based on timing. This is oftentimes based on the first thing that whatever it is that a person decided to say. And that means that things can be incredibly wrong. Why is this an incredibly bad thing? Number one, I think that court of public opinions are heavily based on pre-existing notions of what that public figure looks like, or what that is, or what currently exists. So for example, if a poor woman, sit down, was sexually assaulted by a beloved public figure like Bob Ross, for example, or Mr. Rogers, it's extremely likely, God forbid, right? It's extremely likely that the court of public opinion will now side with Mr. Rogers and not this poor woman. This is in a lot of cases because you have continuously cemented the idea in the public's mind that the court of public opinion is correct. That woman will never be believed. But secondly, I think the court of public opinion oftentimes feeds into racist and sexist tendencies of the mob, right? So a black individual under your world is far more likely to be believed to be a sexual assaulter versus white people, sit down, who are rich, who are far more likely to be conventionally attractive, who are far likely to have much lighter versions of this court of public opinion that you talk about. But furthermore, as a rich person in your world, you're far more likely to be able to influence the media as well, right? It means that you are also able to influence the court of public opinion and change their minds as to how much influence as well. That's really unfair and unfair. Technically, also the government don't have as much influence as they are quite more likely to be far more likely to less likely. I think what almost like the liberal approach sit down, you can be part of public opinion very likely correct. Here's what instance in the real world, right? I mean, literally come out and say it was consistent beside the person of the day, right? The reason why they are there, and that's why we get it, because companies for years have been cementing this idea that the court of public opinion is correct, and that we should continuously and whatever else is correct, and it's okay to make this off your table. I understand the reason why we win this debate is because these are the women who need to be protected the most. This is the majority of individuals in society, and the fact that there's a current rising sit-down, right-wing rhetoric that currently puts people and currently puts these people in power and these poor women stand out. That's why there's extremely huge difference in who gets fired and who doesn't, and why we should always leave it up to the court of law.
People disbelieve victims more when Netflix has decided that it wasn't a good accusation.
But you're not listening to my argumentation. I'm telling you at the point where people continuously believe and are cemented by the idea of the court of law, because a company does it and says that it's correct, we can take legal action about this. People conflate that in their minds with actual legal action. But third of all, what I will argue is that it actually sways justice, right? So you have to understand that in a court of regular law, it's made up of regular people. And as much as you try to isolate juries as much as possible, for example, in cases like O.G. Simpson, at worst, individuals will be influenced by the court of public opinion. That means under your side, you are making it so that individuals are far less likely or far more likely to believe a court of public opinion that is extremely likely to be wrong, or inside that Republican state is more likely to believe the man because of the current court of public opinion that necessarily exists. So you are actually getting in the way of actual court legal jurisdictions because of the fact that you are heavily swaying and imprinting into people's minds that we should believe what this court does. For those reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
Thanks for that speech.
As CEO is going to talk about two things. First of all, we're going to talk about how the court of public opinion actually reached their decision, and we're going to tell you why the decision is most likely going to be right in that discussion, ladies and gentlemen, because it's accompanied by high and tedious due process and high burden of proof, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be way more nuanced than Shari's argument. And secondly, I'm going to talk about how the court of public opinion can actually and is justified to circumvent the court of law, because it's actually more representative to the dynamics of societal values, ladies and gentlemen, and actually gives people an interest to want to do activism. But one rebuttal to the entire government side. They think that corporations right now already have an interest to wash their hands off, ladies and gentlemen, tell people to move on, for example, and not solve the systemic problems that OG wants to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be the first team to talk about the position and behavior of corporations in this situation, ladies and gentlemen, regardless of whether or not they're rich or poor. What you need to understand is that in a world without the court of public opinion, we don't fire employees, ladies and gentlemen. Corporations are most likely wanting to defend their employees in court, ladies and gentlemen. They want to spend a lot of money and give a lot of lawyers, ladies and gentlemen, to defend their employee in the court of law. This is because they view that employee as a productive and valuable member of that organization, ladies and gentlemen, and they do not want that employee to be lost from them, for example. They do not want that productive worker to be getting off. The only way for them to try to change their cost and benefit analysis, ladies and gentlemen, is that we change the decision-making cost and benefit of that employee. When the public is outraged, ladies and gentlemen, I mean that there's consumer boycotts, for example, there's an outrage against their brand, for example, they get bad PR, ladies and gentlemen, that employee no longer becomes marginally as productive as they had before and might even become more detrimental, ladies and gentlemen, towards that corporation. So the first step is trying to get that corporation to want to fire that employee in the first place, ladies and gentlemen, and that's not something that OG has ever been talking about. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, on follow-up actions to talk about systemic problems, what you need to understand that the the court of law rarely has any follow-up actions, ladies and gentlemen, to societal problems in the situation, because they're oftentimes corrective, they're only retributive, ladies and gentlemen, in trying to provide punishment for a certain person. They don't try to actively change how society behaves, how HR policies are implemented, ladies and gentlemen, how we change societal perception about sexual assault, for example. But the court of public opinion is different because they see these issues as a social issue, ladies and gentlemen, and they're more likely to follow up on the following of their employees. So they're not just satisfied by the fact that the employee is fired, they want to know why the HR allowed this to happen in the first place and how the HR can change their policies, ladies and gentlemen, so that in the future that doesn't happen. We never got an explanation from OG why they have a follow-up on systematic problems. They just said it and did not solve their own problem, ladies and gentlemen. First, substantive. Why do we actually have dubious due process, ladies and gentlemen? And why does this mean that the court of public opinion is actually more reliable than the court of law? What you need to understand is that it's very hard and rare for the court of public opinion to reach a verdict, ladies and gentlemen, that a person is found and deemed guilty. You need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that to find a person guilty in the court of public opinion, you can't just have a couple of loud people ranting on the internet. You literally have to have a significant and visibly clear majority, ladies and gentlemen, inside the society deeming that these people are guilty, ladies and gentlemen, because that's how this public discussion reaches a verdict. They reach some type of agreement, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, that we think that this person is wrong. That often happens in internet feeds, ladies and gentlemen, when a lot of people are condemning these people, or like societal public secrets, in which all of Indonesia knows that our house leader, for example, is lying about his illness just to avoid a corruption case, ladies and gentlemen. What you need to understand is that this verdict is very high. Why? First, because it's very rare that society is agreeing upon anything. Most of the society is polarized, ladies and gentlemen, and diverse in opinions, are educated in different levels, ladies and gentlemen. So the fact that they reach this agreement means that they fulfill a very high burden of proof, ladies and gentlemen, to say that there's a significant amount of people who have no or little doubt that the evidence and the story provided to them, ladies and gentlemen, makes this person guilty. We can then say, ladies and gentlemen, that millions of people deeming this person guilty realistically means that they're guilty, ladies and gentlemen, because that's the literal definition of reasonable beyond doubt, ladies and gentlemen, which is what happens in the court, when many people have reasonable assumptions that this person is actually guilty, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. But secondly, there's also mitigating factors in the court of public opinion, when it's very easy for you to clarify or have diverging views. We think it's much easier than Sarah wants you to believe, because many people might want to defend you, might have similar opinions than you, ladies and gentlemen, and the public opinion never reached that consensus. The fact that people didn't defend you, didn't listen to your clarification, ladies and gentlemen, means at the end of the day that you are probably wrong, ladies and gentlemen, and that society has reached that guilty verdict. Especially since that the bar that opposition has to reach is not corporate punishment, ladies and gentlemen, it's just firing an employee, and firing an employee doesn't require the breaking of a law, ladies and gentlemen. It just requires, for example, the cost and benefit of that corporation to not deem that employee marginally beneficial anymore, ladies and gentlemen. And to the extent that we have actually fulfilled this burden, it shows you that the court of public opinion can be trustworthy and can be reliable on our side. Yes?
What incentive would society have to even lobby for the enforcement of laws if they can just accuse women of having extrajudicial ways to handle their situation?
Okay, second argument. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, we think that the court of public opinion is justified to circumvent the court of law and can actually enforce the court of law, ladies and gentlemen. The first thing that you need to understand is that the court of public opinion is more accessible for the average Joe or grassroots society, ladies and gentlemen, to have an impact on their definition of justice and through their activism, ladies and gentlemen. So they think that they can actually influence their environment around them and have a tangible impact. What you need to understand is that the law isn't absolute. It is created as a reflection and a recollection of morals and values owned by the society to regulate what we deem as important and a moral compass, ladies and gentlemen. What you need to understand is that the law and the court system is oftentimes an institution that is slow to adapt to the values and the changing of society, ladies and gentlemen. It's oftentimes because the building of our bureaucracy, for example, the interpretation of law that is oftentimes more literal, more rigid, more conservative, ladies and gentlemen, or it's filled by old judges and old politicians, ladies and gentlemen. Thus, they oftentimes do not have a verdict on the seriousness of sexual assault. law, on the seriousness that tolerance must now be a right or a protection and something that is not written in the law, ladies and gentlemen. What then you need to understand is that the court of public opinion actually reflects the values of society even better, ladies and gentlemen, than the court of law, because it's the accumulation of values that the society has and is delivering justice for these people. This thus also provides a pressure for the court to reform, ladies and gentlemen, because they understand that many of the society is dissatisfied and taking means into their own hands. Because people won't do this, ladies and gentlemen, if the court is already doing it by themselves. But the fact that they feel that they have to do it, ladies and gentlemen, means that the court is oftentimes inadequate. And that's when, ladies and gentlemen, people are actually getting the justice that they feel within their values instead of a court system that is too old, too rigid, and not following their values. Because we actually have a court that is reliable and has a due process with high burden of proof that reaches our reasonable beyond doubt, and because we actually reach the dynamics of society of what the purpose of law was, we beg to oppose.
I'm looking at the debate and it's pretty simple to me. Most people are just arguing about sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. So the team that really wins the debate has to be about the team that provides you generalized criteria of how justice should be defined, A, and B, whether or not altering that sense of definition has real impact, and therefore being a better criteria. But even before that, I think it's still important to engage with a lot of convenient characterizations that happened in the debate. So first, let's take them one by one, starting with the closing theme, right? First, and look at this is where the problems, especially with this bench's argumentation is. They say that court of public opinion is right because there's an overwhelming social consensus, right? So basically, apparently that's going to lead to everyone just asking, why did HR allow to do this anyway? I think this is very, this depends on the scenario. So for example, if 100 women come out and start accusing, for example, Harvey Weinstein of sexual misconduct, even if the company does not fire Harvey Weinstein, all of the media companies are still put on guard and they will still reform all of their internal memos and policies. Why is this analysis really important? It's important because there's a second priority in the debate that comes from not just firing Harvey Weinstein, but the precedence it sets and the ways companies get to cop out of it. So it's a non-consequential benefit that's completely out of the debate A, and it's not also an evidence of why this is a categorical imperative of all public opinions, right? So that's the first extension. The second extension is, but oftentimes there's a lot of agreement over the fact that these people have done it. See, the problem with using words like agreement and fact is you also forget Shari's second extension, which is the deal breaker in the debate about why all of these things are very relative and therefore you cannot use these things to deal break justice, right? Because you simply can't be convenient, and Mubarak's point of information just doesn't make any sense because the court of public opinion is very fluidly defined, right? It means in Kansas, when there's overwhelming consensus that if you're a woman, you don't have the right to take away the life of a baby, that's when the Hobby Lobby and the companies associated with it can go like, if you're a woman and you work in your company, you can't get your baby aborted. That's literally when you can refuse service. This is when we go back to pre-civil rights era, where overwhelming public consensus that if you're a slave, then you're not a human being means we can reject service to you. That's the problem when you fall victim to public consensus and you allow that to be used as the moral arbiter in terms of the decisions companies make. So we think at best it's very convenient, A, but B, it doesn't negate Shari's first extension about the overwhelming scenarios where the public consensus is overwhelmingly bad. But moving into the second part of the debate, therefore about the unique criteria that we provided, I'll take opening.
Okay, so your argument about what can happen in Kansas is not applicable to this motion. This motion is a regret motion of what happened in the past, specific to a specific context. Can you debate that context and tell us why Harvey Weinstein and all of those people who got fired shouldn't have been?
No, it's not. The motion says 3 examples, but the motion is generally about whether or not you validate the court of public opinion. And we literally understood that Mubarak loves doing stuff like that. That's why Sharif was really explicit about telling you that this debate and the instances it set out and the principles that it puts against each other is also about validating court of public opinion. But more importantly, in that case, you lose the debate in all the inconvenient cases where court of public opinion has vindicated someone who was not really guilty. That means you still lose the debate and you only win the very convenient debate, right? So this is the second part of the debate where you went way beyond not just what the justice system should prioritize, but like why it should do it, right? So this is where we told you two really unique things, right? The first thing we told you is under all circumstances, the problem with validating the court of public opinion is you're going to lead to unique harms, right? So this is really important because it means that when you do not let so in a regret motion where companies are not firing these employees is a motion where you don't have these harms versus a motion where companies are taking this up as a reason for firing. You have at least three unique harms that's true, right? First, this is also when you validate the other side, right? So this is when Republican supporters come up with support for some pedophile senator, it is also okay because it's also unilaterally held by the court of public opinion in that block that is okay, right? So you also have to be able to defend stuff like that. That's why court of public opinion should never be allowed to infringe upon individual rights of people. I'll also talk about the second criteria about why we focus on individualness and why it's really important. But secondly, right, this also means that you allow people to absolve their guilt. This is where the instance of O.J. Simpson was really important, right? Where literally the court of public opinion behind a figure went against your side and no one talks about this. In that case, it meant literally the jury was swayed to make a decision as opposed to putting the person through the guilty verdict. It means it has real cost in the ways in which it can affect real consequences, right? But finally, we're also the only team that gave you a really unique criteria of why individuals are really, really important in this debate, right? So this is really important. So at the end of the debate, why is it that you should err on the side of the singular individual as opposed to the mob? Now recognize this, the mob is always angry. It may be correct, but it may not be correct, right? Opening sometimes, like first speaker doesn't talk about it, but second speaker sort of talks about like why justice is as it is, but doesn't talk about what makes the importance of every single stakeholder in justice really important, right? So this is where we need to look into, at least three things, right? So like the problem with the corporation being able to fire a person who is simply held by the mob mentality as guilty is you prioritize the mob over the single individual. It means within the confines of justice, you have now accepted that it is okay to deprioritize the singular individual who is the most vulnerable stakeholder because literally the mob is against that person. That's why, so this analysis was important because it gives you the justification of why you're innocent till you're proven guilty. But secondly, this is also really important because to the extent in a court of justice, you enact real violence of people. In a court of public justice, it means you also enact real costs on people, right? But thirdly, this is really important because you remove choices from individuals. And Shai's second extension was important for that reason because in all the ways you remove choices from individuals means that it's not just something corporations can do, but there's a real cost on the lives of these people, and that's why it's never okay to do that. But most importantly, and this is a discussion that we really needed to have, and we still don't have any engagement with that, and was missing in the opening team, the principle of justice as it is matters, and we should never compensate upon it, because it's not just a convenient debate. You have to be okay with that, a person firing an Islamist because you think that person is from Jamaat Islami, and in Bangladesh, they're just considered to be criminals. You have to be okay with overwhelming public opinions in kangaroo courts, like holding people simply liable and like killing them if necessary, all of those things. You start making all of those concessions and it's impossible to draw the line. But more importantly, you harm the victims on an immediate basis. On both of those criteria, you win the debate. Thank you.
Thanks for that speech. I invite the opposition.
Test. Can I drink this? Fine. If the general public was generally satisfied with how conventional legal systems work and how courts are handling justice within society, Why on earth would they choose to make things difficult for themselves by participating in courts of public opinion and wanting to add to the system of conventional justice? The fact that people are so active in these courts of public opinion, the fact that millions of people participate, signifies that there is some kind of general dissatisfaction. There is a flaw to the way in which conventional courts are working. And that's why our extension was important. It shows how courts and the legal systems need to be dynamic in reflecting the changing values of society. And sometimes it's too slow. Courts and conventional courts with their like bureaucratic systems and like their slow systems are very slow in the way that they adapt to these changes. And that's why that was an important extension, right? I'll take care of three main areas of discussion in my speech. First, the principle of whether or not it's fair to fire these people without absolute legal proof of guilt and like a not absolute due process. Second, I'll talk about how we handle structural problems, for instance, like sexism in the workplace. And finally, I'll go out to rehash Alex's argument about dynamic reflection of values and laws in the legal system. So first, is it fair for them to be fired without absolute legal proof of guilt? Opening government tell you that the reason why it's important is the principle of self-defense, that this is important as mitigating factors and that it's absent in courts of public opinion. The ability to defend yourself in court of public opinion is not absent. Whenever people are attacking you on social media or whatever other platform you use in courts of public opinion, you can defend yourself. You can post and say that I am innocent for the following reasons. You can try to provide compelling reasons as to why you're not guilty. Your friends can do the same. You can retweet and like repost things, no thank you, that try to like portray your innocence to society. And we think that this actually works in a similar way to conventional courts. So we don't think your ability to self-defend is entirely absent in our side of the house, right? So it's not entirely unfair. Then they tell you that the reason why, no thanks, you need to have the exact same meticulous due process as a conventional legal court is because the impacts of the court punishments and the impacts of getting fired are equal. We contend that they are absolutely not equal. On both sides, if these people are fired or they get legal punishments in court, on both sides you lose your job. On both sides your reputation is ruined and life generally gets harder. But in a court punishment, you can be, for instance, completely barred from public office for the rest of your life. You can have all of your assets frozen, and therefore it makes sense that a conventional court would have a legal bar that's like more difficult to fulfill than like a general court of public opinion, right? So we don't agree at all that the impacts of these two forms of punishment are equal. Then opposing government comes into the debate, and this is where it starts to get interesting. They say that courts of public opinion are always unfair because they're random and they deserve no legitimacy. They tell you that these courts are based on rumors, timing, and pre-existing bias, and therefore they should never be believed. We absolutely agree that, no thanks, rumors are all over social media. That is common knowledge, that is not an argument, right? But we think that upon understanding that social media is full of gossip, courts of public opinion don't automatically rule guilty any individual that has gossip against them. There is very long discussion upon all of these things, right? We have these very long threads where people reply to each other with detailed investigative posts, and like people who take different positions on this particular issue have the opportunity multiple times, no thank you, to state their defense. And we think that it's not that that in order for you to reach like a large social majority and a complete like consensus on whether or not this person is guilty, you need to be incredibly compelling to the majority of society, right? And we don't think that gossip cuts it because the general public is already aware that the internet and social media is full of gossip, so they're more likely to be aware that I'm not going to be swayed by any random piece of gossip that I read on the internet. No, thank you, right? So we think that the conclusion of that is, given that a society is very polarized, notice that there are all kinds of people with multiple ideologies participating in these courts of public justice. What does that mean? At the point at which you can reach a general majority out of all these different kinds of people with their different educational, moral, cultural, and economic backgrounds, when the general public agrees that you're guilty, then we think that that means that it's not relative, like the speaker before me told me. It's actually reflective that most likely these people are guilty. And most of the time, people do know this person is guilty. It's just a question of how much punishment they're going to get handed in court when they do go to court at the end of the day. Two conclusions you can take from this clash is that, first of all, no thank you, the bar for courts of public opinion are actually very high. It's not, you actually do have to go through a long process to prove that these people are guilty. But second of all, even if it's low, it makes sense that it would be lower than a conventional court because the kinds of punishments are obviously much bigger in a conventional court. I'll take opening.
Look, I don't know what country you live in where everyone thinks the same way, but either way, on both sides, this person may lose your job. their job. The difference is, under your side, the victim is blamed, traumatized for accessing extrajudicial avenues, and future victims find it extremely difficult to come out and access closure.
You are entirely correct that people don't think the same way. People are very different and people are very polarized on the internet. That is exactly why, when you have the internet that is so incredibly diverse, when the public is able to reach a general consensus that this person is guilty, most likely it means it's true. That means that closing government's material that these courts are random is absolutely incorrect. The principle goes to us. Second of all, let's talk about the issue of how we handle structural problems of sexism in the workplace. This was an argument brought by opening government when they say that this enables corporations to take the easy way out by saying that, well, we fired them, what else do you want us to do? And they don't do anything after that. No, we actually think that this acts as a trigger. No, thank you for further structural action. Because at the point at which they're fired, you can say that a very influential and powerful individual was found guilty in this corporation. And if that happened to one individual, most likely the symptoms of that are also visible in other parts of the corporation. And that actually becomes an impetus for these for society to become more aware to these companies, more wary, and that actually creates more incentive for you to investigate these companies and the kind of sexist culture more. But that can only happen when you provide legitimacy to the court of public opinion by saying that they have actual tangible impacts of being able to fire a person. So we think that this acts as an impetus to handle further structural problems. We also take this discussion. But third and finally, we told you why this creates a dynamic reflection of values and laws. We told you why it signifies the failure of conventional courts to address dynamic perceptions of law, because in the status quo, law is centralized to the elites, the judges and the fancy lawyers that get to talk about what they think justice is. But the fact that courts of public opinion are able now to come together and actually create tangible impacts, like firing influential and powerful individuals, signifies that society is becoming more active in the legal system, and their opinions are being more reflected in the way that justice is being carried out. The very purpose of law in the first place is to reflect what society believes justice is, and we are the only team to show you that these courts of public opinion are best able to reflect that. Proud to oppose.
Thanks for that speech. It is now over the toxicology mechanics. And hang around.
Speech, good speech.